I'm Tom Murray, and I'm speaking with Geoff Fitch and Tamara
Androsoff or Androsoff.
Androsoff.
Yeah.
Androsoff.
Thank you. And we are giving a good old holy, what's that? Hail Mary, holy, sacred try at contributing to this dialogue on the faces of spirit. And we're going to start by let's start by just saying kind of who we are. And then we'll do another little round to kind of do a little bit of framing for ourselves. Okay. So I've been hanging out and publishing stuff in the integral community for over 10 years. I'm a research scientist and a writer, and I'm an editor at Integral Review Journal, and I'm speaking to you from the glorious beginning of summer of Western Massachusetts, USA, in the time of the coronavirus and the Floyd protests. And we're going to talk about spirituality and religion and stuff. Who wants to go next?
Well, I'm Tamara Androsoff, and I am a integrally informed psychotherapist and coach who is working in New Zealand. I'm originally from Canada and have been in New Zealand now for 22 years. And I'm also on faculty for GTC, the Generating Transformative Change program with Pacific Integral, myself and John Wood here down in the South Pacific. And yeah, I mean, Ken's writings they changed my life a long time ago. And the framework stands up over time, which I just think is amazing. And I'm really looking forward to having this conversation.
And I'm Geoff Fitch, calling in from the Seattle area. And I'm a co-founder of Pacific Integral and a coach and teacher and engaged in human development in a number of different ways. And yeah, really happy to be here too. Been involved with Integral for the last 20 years or so in different ways, and friends with these two people.
Thanks, Geoff. Yeah, Geoff is buds with both of us, and Tamara and I have had like a couple of conversations, a few emails, and we're still getting to know each other. And this is part of our getting to know each other.
Indeed.
Yeah. And what we all of us have a strong in terms of how we approach integral theory and related things. All of us have a strong developmental orientation. We all are familiar with the stages model. I've also been through the GTC program. We've all worked with Terri O'Fallon and Kim Barta. Maybe that will come in through the conversation. I hope it does, in terms of what our unique contribution might be. So let's just go around and do just a little framing. We're talking about this very general open question about the future of spirituality and religion. And I was thinking that spirituality is a word that we came up with to try to account for the parts of religion that modernity sort of left behind or didn't pay attention to. So religion was sort of all-inclusive, and it's in the time when it was sort of the reigning worldview. So art and morality and family raising and education and every possible thing kind of needed to come under that umbrella, at least in the speaking of the Western Christian world that I'm most familiar with. And as as religion lost its prominence, and whatever happened to God, whether God is dead or whatever, this word spirituality came in to sort of take its place. And it's also a conglomeration that includes a lot of things kind of glommed together. And it's not doing the same work as religion. And I feel like the term spirituality is getting kind of obsolete already for us, even though we're not that far after the 60s and all of that spiritual stuff. So I'm interested in talking about where that term might be going, or whether something might be replacing it, and what it includes and what it leaves out in terms of what we need to have a thriving society and psyche. That's my frame, and I'm sticking to it. Who's next?
I guess what I would like to also include or add to that is about, like, who are we speaking to, which is the integral community, and speaking about, so we talk about these broad strokes of spirituality and religion, it's within a certain context. So to be in America, and even smaller than, it's an integral community in America or maybe in Europe, but a Western kind of frame for it. I'm in New Zealand, which is different. I think that our two countries have some distinct differences. And I'd just love to just keep bringing that forward, but also thinking about this question developmentally, which is, religion served a very, very good purpose, and it still does in lots of parts of the world. It's a very viable and vibrant approach to organizing humans around a myth, and also making them behave and be kind to each other. And the movement towards spirituality became a very individualistic approach, and it was a really good to differentiate. Like, it's a really important movement developmentally, but I think we're kind of stuck in this individualistic pursuit called spirituality, and this longing for more community and more of a we is emerging, but we haven't organized what's that next step. So that's a really interesting inquiry. It's one that it's very alive in the GTC program, around becoming a we. Like, how do we establish a sense of we-ness and have this conversation with the mystery that is life, the cosmos, all of the subtle realms, and then how do we organize each other as humans, or organize around something that helps us be kind to each other and the world we live in. So that's the frame that I'm sticking to.
Good. We
But
have
I'm
our
open.
dogmas. We have our emerging dogmas.
I'm going to be very dogmatic about it.
Good.
Yeah, not really.
Yeah, no, I love both of your frames and what you're pointing to for the conversation, and I just maybe just throw a little something to add to it, is just to keep in mind how the conversation can become, insular around our integral perspective, our place in culture, our levels of development, and those dimensions. And yeah, just remember to include, the different, cultural contexts that this question arises in. And in particular, I'm interested in how, just how much spirituality and religion is a kind of lever by which we divide ourselves socially. Yeah, so it's a lot for the conversation, but that's what I have to add to it. Yeah.
I guess just one other frame is then, as we're talking about those things that are external, they're also internal in us, and how we can keep an eye on how this is emerging through the three of us as we speak, as we're here as a we.
Yeah.
And an I.
one of the things that we mentioned before we started recording was kind of the hubris of and the intellectual abstraction of talking about such large things like the future of spirituality and what is religion. And it's like, not only is it like, who are we? And, you know, what kind of little drop in the ocean of opinion can we contribute? Is it worth anything? But also just like grounding it in how is it real for us? You know, how is this thing real for us? Yeah. So I thought that might be a good way to start. We could talk about that. We could also try like a sentence starter round on that. Do you guys have thoughts?
I think we should just dive in
Okay.
and just talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just see we need to kind of weave together the frames
Yeah.
that we spoke to. I think we have diversity in the space. We just need to weave it together, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can start. I have some things bubbling up.
Yeah.
So when I think of spirituality myself, I was raised Catholic. I was actually, they almost got me to be an altar boy, but I ended up being the person that did the overhead slides at the folk mass on Sunday mornings. I was sort of like the priest's secondhand person, you know. And I don't know, about the usual time, around 12 or 13, I started to really see how, you know, a lot of it was bullshit and whatever, you know, a lot of what society said, what my parents would say was bullshit. And but there was something I kept about, not so much maybe about religion, but about why there's something about spirituality or spirit that is still important to me. I experienced some deep senses of transcendence and connection and meaning in the context of some of those church experiences. And then I'll just also say that later in life, I didn't have a really strong connection with the community, although there was some community there in the church. It definitely provided community, but I didn't feel like a devoted part of any group or anything. And then as I got older, my community became the dance community, so that's like my version of the community part. So I'm kind of thinking there's like the community part, and I feel like I built a kind of robust sense of that with the local dance community, the improv dance community here. Something about family is also from raising kids, community, and then the spirit part. And then there's all the myth part, which I had the stories and the myths, which sort of got completely thrown out and replaced with I don't know what. But yeah, and something about when I was younger, I started learning meditation, and there's something about the places that would take me that was related to this question of spirit.
I was smiling because when you said that you went to like church as a kid and were involved with it, and at a certain point you realized, you know, what it was bullshit and what your parents said to you was bullshit. Then I was reflecting on my own upbringing, and you know, I was in a non-religious family, and my dad was a doctor and a kind of a rational, conservative, you know, skeptical person. You know, if he had a religion, it was probably sarcasm. And you know, then I realized, like, I had the same experience, right? Like, I grew up with my with my atheist father. Realized that was bullshit. And what my father was telling me was bullshit, you know. And you know, pursued spirituality. Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, you know, I mean, I love it. Like a couple things you said was really interesting. I mean, one is like that sense of like that you know, the sort of more developmental mystical dimension of what we talk about with spirituality, that through meditation you had like these deepening experiences. And I think you know, something of what we point to there is it's pointing to, you know, like, you know, the perennial view, it's pointing to that through engagement with this thing that we sometimes call spirituality, you can arrive at a, you know, a deeper understanding. You can arrive at a view of what's happening, you know, a view of what reality is, a view of the mystery, a view of something that's deeper, that's non-ordinary. You know, you pierce through something to realize the kind of the truth, the deeper truth. And that's, you know, in the integral frame, we see that there's developmental dimensions to that. But that's something that seems important. And then you also point to the community dimension as showing up. And I think that's really poignant, as Tamara mentioned today, because, you know, we're in a moment here where our modern culture is, you know, in a very fractured state, and in a way feels like it's trying to order into a degree of wholeness, to find its way together at a different order, you know, and maybe having, you know, expended this individualistic, you know, path, you know. And so there's really something in a way in Western, modern, white, you know, Northern cultures, like, you know, we've got disconnected from community. So part of the spirituality in that context is rediscovering of it. So kind of deep longing, I think, in a lot of people. And there's something, I think, for the future of spirituality, for spirituality in general, always to bring people together. Yet that's not in a concrete way, you know, in a building with a, you know, with a scroll on the front of the building saying what the word is, but it's at a deeper level of complexity.
I think as you two are been speaking, like what's happening inside of me is just a deepening into stillness. I'm feeling quieter and quieter. And in that quietness is that space of unity that, you know, that we all share, that we can access together. So thank you for that. It's really lovely.
Thank you.
I had some thoughts while Geoff was talking. Actually, these might sound sort of contrary to what both of you have just said, although I totally cherish the silent depths of presence in our presence. But these are some thoughts I've been having that are related. One is there's this idea that that gets passed around, that something about spirituality or contemplative reflection brings us closer to a sort of reality as it is. And I tend to take issue with that. Not that I am saying that Geoff said it very literally. He'll probably agree with what I'm about to say. I think that in these,
I knew if I said reality, it would get you going.
I won't use the word epistemology or ontology at all. I'll cut those out. I think what happens in these deep reflective states is two things. We discover what reality feels like. We discover more and more of what reality is in the sense of feeling into it and being it. So I guess that's the way I would agree. But often it gets translated as like some idea that we discover about reality. And I think that's completely false. And what happens is that we continuously and increasingly discover what reality is not. So we keep running into, oh, I thought that was true, or I thought that was true, and that's not true. And that, so it's kind of a, I guess you could say at the level of ideas, beliefs, concepts, it's a path of increasing emptiness, and at the level of embodiment and feeling, it's a path of increasing fullness. Yeah, yeah. I did a lot of vipassana in the Goenka tradition, and they're always saying, you know, find reality as it is. And I sort of like was nodding my head for decades in that, and now I'm at a place it's like, no, that's kind of the wrong way to interpret all this. You know, I think it's a dangerous way to interpret it.
I like your taking a different stand actually around it.
Yeah, I don't feel like it's so different, but it's sort of what came up there.
Yeah.
So I mean, this is one of the things that always is like a tragic comedy in some ways, is when a group of people are sitting together trying to go, well, what do you mean about spirituality? What do you mean about spirituality? You know, and it's a really deep, rich conversation or dialogue until we get into conflict about it. And that is just so good, like that hitting into each other, the growth that happens in that, if we can regulate ourselves through it to stay open, present, and connected. That fullness is fantastic. And I guess the beauty that we can sit here together and also fall deeper into stillness and awareness of awareness. That's the backdrop. So that's the place where there's unity between the three of us. And then in the dialogue, we have this difference, which is also profound, more irritating at times, but really growthful if we can position ourselves with that. And I think there's something in that around that next movement, how we have both of those together as a group of people, but I don't know if that's ever going to be the world. You know, I don't know if it's necessary.
I wanted to ask Tamara if there was anything in what I said that brought up a moment of irritation. That might be an interesting place to noodle into.
I think it was just that bit around, you know, that the monks might have been saying something to you and you've discovered something else. And you're putting it together this way now. And they're putting it together that way. And I might be putting it, you know, reality together another way. And they're all true. How can they not be true? Like they're true, but partial if we're going to use an integral lens on it. But it's fascinating to me constantly about when I really stop to feel your otherness around, wow, like you're making sense of reality in such a different way than I am. Reality. Yeah.
How so?
It might be like a simple thing is that, you know, you've taken this path and exploring this territory and I haven't. I've explored a different path, different territory, and have made sense of that experience of emptiness and fullness you know, perhaps in different ways, that there's difference. And then there's this unity, because I can feel it as we talk. I can feel the unity with us together. And having that makes me a whole lot more curious, rather than feeling defensive or that I have to tell you the ways that you're wrong, using words like epistemology and ontology.
Ooh. Busted, Tom.
You gonna say something, Geoff?
Yeah, I was just feeling into, you know, what all is like present in the conversation, and you know, like yeah, what to respond to. Yeah. Yeah, you know, I mean, like the thing that you said about, you know, see reality as it is, and that piece, you know, you're right. I don't really have any objection to it. You know, I like, part of what I always kind of make sense of in our conversation is that you know, we're using the, you know, sort of the distinction making mind, and we sort of make a cut, and then something gets out, and then we put it back in, and then something gets missing from that. And so we're always trying to like circle something and discover what it is. But it comes back to when you said is, you know, the word spirituality is sort of losing its, you know, usefulness. And it's just a problem with language in general, you know, at a certain level. It's just we're we're kind of working with limitations. And I think there's, so, and I tend to like be practical too, and think in terms of practical ways. And so the practicality of what you were bringing up there to me is like, if we like assume that we're seeing reality as it is, you know, that can be this, like the seed of a delusion, you know, that we don't like walk forward with a sense of like, you know, uncertainty about things. So I think, you know, I've seen in my own spiritual development and others working in their spiritual development that there can be a kind of a dogma about what awakening is or evolution is. It can bring you to a point of arrival, and then that can become a kind of delusion. And you know, so we know through like about, you know, how humans perceive and things like that, that there's all sorts of delusions built in. And so that's good. And I think there's something true in that sense of seeing reality as it is, which is that there's something in that like letting go of what the illusions or what you've, you know, as you put it in a more kind of negative frame of like seeing what it isn't, that something is revealed that is in a first person perspective palpably truer, like, and to sort of take a kind of, to kind of deconstruct that as not as it is to deny the like the actual experience of arriving at something deeper. And to me it's really very much connected to like the higher qualities that we'll often ascribe. You know, Tamara was pointing to, you know, having a sense of unity or curiosity or love or compassion or non-separation. And these are things that in our hearts we sense and reach for and intuit. And that also is the fruit of that kind of letting go. So there's some, you know, there's something there, and something that can become delusion about, you know, thinking you're seeing reality as it is. So, you know, practically, it's useful to me to hold both of those, I would say.
Yeah, but it's
Don't hurt me.
it's how would I do that without hurting myself?
Touche.
Um, yeah, sometimes like one of my pet peeves or places I can kind of get a little fired up is around confidence and certainty and how language is used to state things, And of course,
Yeah.
I'm sort of doing my own little performative contradiction in the midst of that sort of raised energy around that issue.
Yeah.
But it does kind of bring to mind, like any version of religion or spirituality has to find a way to manage the polarities that come up in life. So, and there are many of them. I mean, it's not a functional system unless it does that in some kind of organic way. So, and I'm thinking of like, like openness versus confidence, or kind of like the ethical gesture to be connected and loving versus discernment, So somehow, whatever spirituality or religion becomes, it has to be a system that metabolizes, allows people to metabolize those polarities. And I think, from a developmental perspective, we can say that one way to do that is with certain stories and myths and rules that, wiser people have figured out that metabolize them for you. But a more developed way to do that is to have a more sort of construct aware or ego aware understanding of how language and so forth work. So you can manage those polarities on the fly instead of having to lean back on something that you were told that also works to manage them. Certainly that polarity that's sort of strong for me now is like the loving, open ethics versus, whatever discernment is, setting boundaries, being confident of what you think reality to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What that brings alive in me as you're talking, Tom, is there's a couple of things. One is that, having been engaged in Terri's work for a long time, from the beginning, really, in some ways, and the stages model is that what we see at these higher reaches of human development is that, they can be rarefied, like as if it's rare, but in the kind of constant inquiry with it, watching people develop, is that, that's starting to be the beginning of human adulthood. That these capacities are coming online. They're not rare or special. That's like you're growing up, growing up into and having these greater capacities for curiosity, compassion, and love. And it's not guaranteed as you develop into later stages, but that if we can frame it more that way, is that this is the ongoing movement to human adulthood. And inside of that, then the thing that I feel really passionate about, it's the hardest thing when we're together as human beings, is how we deal with difference. Because the way our brains are wired is that it is a threat. And that's a very old evolutionary reality. And when we're sitting together, that we get triggered, that stuff gets triggered around difference, and then we're treating each other as enemies. and it's not like we mean to, and you can even have great heart and care, but you get hijacked in that moment. And how we bring greater awareness to that development, like that, it just doesn't happen by itself. It's something that we have to cultivate the capacity for, right?
Yeah.
And how that stuff can get really messy at really smart, really spiritual people. How that can just get all very slippery. And I've
Say
seen
more
it in
about,
myself.
yeah,
Okay.
say more about
I've
what
seen it in myself. I mean, as the like high statusing, it's a really subtle form of attack. I've certainly experienced it in the integral community. So then, but then it's so sophisticated, the answer, it's hard to kind of, really deal with it in the interpersonal. But that's something that says that real understanding that we're wired for protection, and it's a very powerful thing, especially if we've experienced trauma. And to really deepen our capacity for what you're talking about, Tom, is like, how does, as a system, for us as a community, understanding that it's an ongoing growthful thing for dealing with difference. And, in the light of, Black Lives Matter and everything else, that there's still this, we have to find a way to dialogue through difference. And that is both a spiritual pursuit, but it's also like, this is the waking up and growing up aspect, like to grow up psychologically and emotionally, to regulate oneself enough to stay present, open, connected to like what is really, really difficult and intense. So, those are.
Yeah,
Sorry.
No, I'm interrupting you, but can I just add to what you're saying?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, no, it's just, I mean, this is like really like a critical thing that you're saying to me, and it's it's really important in the context of the work that we're doing, and also to me, I think it's something in the conversation that we've been having so far is like in the background, and it's just, and probably just so assumed by the three of us that it's good to make it explicit anyway, but that that from in the integral perspective, like you're saying, spirituality is sort of a line of development, and the integral perspective would have us be more whole in it. And even if we look at what it is to develop, or what it is to be a healthy human being, or what it is to be an ethical human being, there's a much bigger picture there that goes beyond just what you'd normally think of as spirituality. And that work is really important. And like in your, the way, Tom, you've looked at it from, in terms of the ascending and descending paths, the way that, I just have thought about it, it's an impulse to include what's absenced in this. And that really includes what you're talking about, Tamara, which is, we might call it shadow work and integral, but that I would even say the way that that's held in integral is really inadequate. It's sometimes understood to be like things we have to clean up as we're going on our path, and that's certainly true. But it's much bigger in the sense that there's trauma, and there's disordering, and there's collective trauma, and there's undiscoverable parts of shadow. There's simply disorder and pain that we're going to live through in our lifetime and many lifetimes, and actually entering into that and living in it and working with it skillfully is really important to our own collective development. And that's just one piece. We also have to learn, there's the horizontal development, the capacities that we have to learn how to spiritually develop. We have to learn how to get toxins out of our environment. We have to learn how to be in integrity with ourselves, to understand who we are, to be you know, there's just so many dimensions to this that go beyond what we'd normally think about development, and it's all really important. Yeah.
I've been having some just really moved, I feel really moved by what you're saying, like teary, really. And been having so many amazing conversations in the last, like since COVID, inside of the protests, around this longing for decolonization, really, is to reclaim land and place and community that we've been severed from in some ways, just within the Western way of being, which is awesome. Wouldn't want it, you know, I'm not saying anything bad about it, but that deep longing for that reclamation of land, of my place. This is my place. This is my mountain. This is my river. This is the context of which I've been formed. These are my ancestors. And just constantly on the edge of this, I've never heard it expressed like I'm hearing it expressed right now. And clearly it's alive in me too, so that'll be a part of it. But it's profound longing, and that is that we-ness that includes the planet. But it is, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I've been experiencing a little extra hopefulness, at least on a good day, with all of this happening. So many of the structural problems and the systemic traumas that our planet holds, or that the species holds, seem to me, so I go into despair pretty easily in terms of, like, you know, God, what would it really take, you know? And I get I can be a little critical of what seem to be like surface approaches, and I feel like I have my own understanding of what's really at the, you know, the core of the healing and the changes in consciousness that are needed. And it's kind of like, you know, I'm glad I feel like I'm doing a teeny bit of work on the right team that's aimed at the core, but it's all kind of in this context of it's so improbable, but still, you know, why not? But lately, with all of the additional chaos and shaking up, it's like this is feeling like, with things that much shaken up, it's more possible to let go of something huge, something that would feel so huge that we could never, as a culture, let go of it. You know, when there's all this movement, and then it's like, whoa, you know, that support system that was a kind of you know, a shadow element of the culture, a kind of stored oppression and trauma in the system. It just feels like it's possible, you know, not even, maybe not probable, but yeah, I just get this sense of hopefulness. I can feel it in my whole body of like what it feels like to let go of a structure that's way down near the bottom. And just feeling the world kind of getting closer to that kind of possibility is actually bringing that up in myself. And I've been doing some deeper shadow work myself. I had some good conversations with Geoff actually a couple of weeks ago. I'm finding places, new places in myself where I store, you know, trauma and structure that feel like they're loosening up into some clarity and some tears and some vulnerability. Yeah.
There's something about what both of you are saying that connects to me, where, you know, Tamara, you keep pointing us to like this greater wholeness, this greater collective, um, and to me that like there's a seed in that, of that sense of like recognizing how humble it is, you know, to what you can do, you know, like and you know, in a way it sort of connects to me too, in the way that this sort of, you know, modern individualistic paradigm is a bit embedded in the integral culture, you know, where it sort of takes on sometimes this sort of messianic view of we're going to save the world, or we have a higher order view of things, and you know, there's like what we can do is very humble. Can be on time to the calls we have on our calendar. You know, we can like make a contribution, you know, but it's very, but you know, like, and to me that's a kind of like, when I go back to like traditional concrete, you know, amber religions, this is one of the beauties of it, is like you can situate yourself in a larger collective and know your place and make your contribution. You know, all you have to do is like spoon the soup, you know, or hand out the leaflets. You know what your part is, you know, and you know you're part of something larger. And I think that's like a lot of, you know, I think in the sort of post-conventional integral communities, there's a lot of talk about like weaving together communities and collectives, and how do we create a greater movement. And I think it's a kind of reaching for an experience of, you know, finding yourself in that greater whole. And yeah, I'm glad you're finding hope. It's important.
On a good day.
Yeah.
One of my favorite improv teachers, like from the States, actually, when he comes over here, one of his favorite sayings is "fuck hope," and more in the sense of like that's something in the future, but right here, right now, like right here, right now, right here, right now. What's opening in this conversation, and that's the only thing that we can do, is the right here, right now. It's so humble, and from that seed, something will grow. Like whether and whatever it is, who knows how it's going to emerge. All we can do is keep shepherding that in.
Yeah, thank you. I've been writing lately about abstraction and its role in development, and kind of in the sense of like, it might seem like as we develop, we get more like complex and abstract, but there's a lot of dangers to that, I guess obvious ones. But what you guys are saying is making me think that, so there's a way that the human mind like goes to these totalities and abstractions and big ideas, and when we're in sort of traditional second person perspective, we have those stories, those grand narratives in the religion, but they're held by the structure of the religion. They only go so far. I mean, they're grand narratives, but they sort of have a place, and even a whole meta dialogue around them that helps you put them in their place and not overuse them, at least in a you know, healthy manifestations of religious communities. But as we move into third person perspective and modernity, we leave that behind. There's no constraint. So the mind gets to create all of even grander and wilder ideas of what's possible and probable and you know, metaphysically out there. And that's a lot of spirituality feels like that, you know, sort of very yeah, sort of losing the tethers that allows it to ground somehow. And so, yeah, so, and one of you said something about the relationship between spirituality and embodiment, which I think is part of what we need to reclaim. I think it's maybe two things come to mind in terms of what spirituality is needing. One is that embodiment, and the other is the move back to the collective from the individual orientation. Yeah.
I think socially, as a modern society, we're reaching for a reorienting to our greater collective, yeah, and spirituality is leaning into that, but a kind of like asterisk warning label, is like, from the perspective of the stages model, we're iterating in and out of the collectives, so in that third person perspective, modern, rise of the individualism, it comes up again at the fifth person perspective, turquoise, of, great frameworks and paradigms and interpenetrating patterns of consciousness that, you want to assert at an individual level, and creativity and fragmentation and that kind of thing, and then a deeper reorientation to the collective at the sixth person perspective. So it's just saying, like, we're not over yet with the sort of journey that we're on as a human family of integrating the individual and the collective. But I think in our current historic moment, there's a lot of work to do there, because I think, we're needing to come back at a deeper coherence, which is really more a mature fourth person perspective.
Yeah. And it, one of the things I've been wondering about lately, and this, it's like more secular, it would be a more secular approach in the lower right quadrants, is one of the things in New Zealand, I don't know if it's the same in the States, but, I was having chats with like my son who's 23 and his mates, and they have this intrinsic entitlement to rights. Like, it's very, like, they've been taught that they have rights and they have an entitlement to a self, which is awesome. But when I was having a conversation with them, it's like, so who's going to give you those rights? Like, who are these people that are supposed to give you these rights? Like, is it Santa? Like, they're relating to the government, like Santa or something.
Mom.
But it was a really profound conversation, because they were like, huh? Right. So I have rights, but I'm entitled to them. I should have them, and I have the right to speak my mind, and I have the right to live my life the way I want. But they have no sense of obligation or sacrifice, which is what religion and that concrete collective would have given. And it's made me think about how in high school, like, and they don't teach, I wonder what would happen if they taught all the way through high school about what it means to be a citizen, what the commons are, how we collectively look after them, about just the civil duty, and the fact that we're co-creating this in a way that would be far more engaging. And it holds that I and we together rather than just the I. Because that leaves them, really disconnected from, and they want it. They want more of a sense of wholeness and community, and but without a bunch of stupid boomers in charge.
Give it time.
As Chloe, said here.
Yeah.
We're getting close to the time that we had set aside, and I would love to keep going whether we record it or not. I'm really enjoying this.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, any last words?
All we need is love. Da, 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 da. All we need is love. That's my last words.
All we need is love.
Love.
Love. Love is all we need.
Love is all we need.
Love is all we need.
All right.
Love is all we need.
Santa
Maxwell Silverhammer
Santa
came down upon his head. Da-da-da-da-da. Like, I know we're kind of goofing around here, but yeah, just can take a moment to say, like, I appreciated the conversation, and it feels like we really touched on a number of important things, and thank you.
Yeah, it's been really lovely. Really appreciated that, our field here together. And
See you guys later. Thanks so much.
Bye.
bye.